Eyes on Sunset Night 1 for once.
Excellent. All set?
Yeah.
I guess just sort of start off by telling me how this originated for you guys.
Well, I just stumbled on an article that online that one of the guys we ended up interviewing had written, laying out this really compelling theory about The Shining. And Rodney and I are friends and collaborators, and I knew he was a huge Kubrick fan, and so I showed it to him, and next thing you know, that's all we wanted to talk about was finding more of these and talking about how they intersected and what we thought of them and so forth, and this project sort of grew out of that.
It's such an interesting style to not really shoot any footage for it. Was that something you knew from the get-go?
Well, I mean, I had done a short in a similar style a couple of years before, where, you know, it was a documentary that had sort of horror movie atmospherics to it, and it was all built on a bed of, you know, voiceover interviews. And there's something really interesting about the way that that worked and how you had to sort of try harder to find imagery to illustrate what people were talking about, you know, if you didn't have, you know, their talking headshots to go back to. So it was really successful on that scale, so in some ways, you know, this seemed like a good opportunity to elaborate on that. You know, I think at the outset, I might have wanted to have kept it back door open to the possibility of going back and maybe restaging an important moment or getting some B-roll, but kind of the more severe I would leave it in the process, the more I'd like it.
I mean, do you find that sort of the American public or the worldwide public is more in tune with documentaries these days? It feels like we sort of see documentary bleeding over into fiction more so.
It's an interesting question. I mean, there's certainly a lot of it, and with YouTube and so forth, a lot of people can sort of make their own, which is really exciting. But we've had a great reception of this, and it's been really exciting just to talk to people about their reactions and so forth.
It sort of feels like the closest thing I was thinking after watching this that I could compare it to, even though it's stylistically completely different, is the Red Letter Media Star Wars.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's something, you know, we're gigantic fans of, and I don't remember if I saw that first, you know, 90-minute Phantom Menace review before we had started, but certainly in the process, it was something that we would that we would absolutely consider and think about and compare to. Certainly, we're doing something a little bit to the left of those guys, but you know, absolutely, that was a really important, you know, thing to consider and influence, and something that I see is kind of similar. But I mean, I'm also drawing on, you know, the influence that In Search Of had, you know, on me when I was a little kid, in sort of a documentary that could work as a horror movie in a weird way, you know, or even, you know, other sort of, you know, cut-ups and remixes, things like, whether you're talking about like the Christian Marclay, you know, the clock or the telephone, or the work of, you know, like Bruce Conner and Craig Baldwin, experimental filmmakers who also had a very playful way of, you know, repurposing existing footage, you know, all to radically different ends.
Then you could have, every time you introduce someone, shown their face and had their title at the bottom. There's something very nice about just knowing them as a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that from the get-go, that was going to be your approach?
Well, I mean, again, that was how I did the short,
Mm-hmm.
and there was, and it worked out pretty well in that experiment. So I totally wanted to take that style further. Again, you know, possibly that might be too much in a feature-length project, but didn't turn out to be.
There was an ongoing discussion about whether we would at least, you know, burn in their names or occupations or so forth, and sort of decided along the way that we didn't want to do that we didn't want to place any kind of real-world values on who they were or what their occupations were. And also, we were really liking how the voices were sort of melding together, and then maybe sometimes you're not sure who's talking and whose theory is whose. It just seemed to add to sort of the dreamlike quality of the film.
How many people did you get in touch with where you were like, these theories don't work for the film? Were there people who were like, you're just insane?
Well, there were people who weren't available. There were sort of two big fish that got away that we would have loved to have had in the film. The mastermind and Rob Ascher, working in England. There was another guy that we talked to, but decided he didn't want to participate at the end of the day. And it was sort of an endless. Oh, there was one guy who swiped my digital recorder and stopped returning calls.
Yeah. And there were a couple people. There was one guy we couldn't find. I mean, like, well, you know, his moniker online, we tracked everywhere to every possible LinkedIn or whatever, and we just could not find him. So that's.
But there was a point, you know, maybe midway through the project where we had to come to peace with the idea that what we're going to present here is only the tip of the iceberg. You know, though, you know, 104 minutes expressly devoted to exploring the symbolic levels of analysis of The Shining may seem like a little much for some people. This could have been 3 times as long, easily. So we tried to find ways in the course of the film of suggesting, you know, what you see here is again a small part, is only a small part of it. So if you see flashes of other web pages that, you know, if you freeze and look at them, we'll have incredibly provocative things to say that we just didn't have time to cover. There's a process of making peace with that, and also with the fact that there are many other parts of The Shining in particular that we might not have had a chance to mention or really drill down as deep as we might have liked to.
There's something very wonderful about this as well, that it's more than just The Shining. It's sort of about film criticism and how we look at things, and you leave hearing some people's theories and saying, I'm not sure that's entirely on point. And other ones are just completely fascinating. Is the film criticism angle something that you think will continue for you?
Well, in the short term, certainly yes, because, you know, we've started 2 sort of follow-up projects, and one of them is a look at another filmmaker's work, but it's related, but it's not strictly symbolic analysis. It's coming at it from different direction. So maybe that'll be the last one, because the other one is totally unrelated. So there's at least one more. We'll see.
When did The Shining enter both of your lives?
I saw it at Brahmins when I was about 15, and then watched it endlessly in college. It was like on some loop on the TV in the basement of my dorm or something. I don't know why, but I watched it over and over again then. And there was sort of a dormant fascination until this. You know, watch it, check in every so often. Rodney had an even younger experience.
Well, I snuck in, you know, when I was 12, you know, as a little kid who thought that he was really into horror movies, but that one was way too much for me, and I had to sneak back out, you know, about 10 minutes in. Though, you know, I was able to re-climb that mountain a few years later, you know, on home video, and really liked it, and in fact thought that a lot of it was very funny at the time. And Kubrick's always been, you know, was my first, you know, favorite filmmaker, and has always been, you know, someone whose work I return to again and again and again. I mean, I remember we actually had, my wife and I had a breakthrough in our relationship when we watched The Shining together at this like Halloween party, and she had always been very afraid of it, but when she actually saw it, and really appreciated it, it was this nice thing that we could share, and it spawned 1,000 in-jokes, as I'm sure it has for a lot of people.
The term found footage has sort of become synonymous with sort of like low-budget horror films, but this is a found footage film, and I'm fascinated as a producer, how tricky is that to have people say, yeah, go ahead?
You know, it was a process, probably a little more complicated than most. We had a really incredible clearance team that we worked with. It was a really intricate process, but at the end of the day, I mean, you know, at one point when we cut it, we thought, okay, maybe we're going to go back and change a lot of this. And fortunately, we didn't have to, because I really like the way it is.
I know that term found footage. I'm happy to hear you bring it up in this context, because for me in film school and, you know, in the years afterwards, I'm happy to hear you bring up the word found footage in context with this film, because I know when I was in film school and for years afterwards, I always associated it with more of a collage remix style of filmmaking. And the term has sort of been appropriated to talk about, the Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity, movies where a character within the film made some film and then someone else found the footage. Nothing against those movies, but they're radically different kinds of productions. And I feel, in ownership of that word, of that phrase. And to me, it always means something very different. It means Bruce Conner, it means Craig Baldwin, it doesn't mean the Blair Witch. But what are you going to do? You can't hold back the tide, I suppose.
Well, thank you guys so much for talking with me.
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed it quite a bit.
Thanks, Silas.
Well, thanks. Good to talk to you.
Good talking with you.
Enjoyed this conversation.
I can't wait to see what you guys do next.
Oh, thanks.